Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. I am your host, Lonnie Jones. My wife Jackie and I moved to the city of Huntsville in 1986 for me to be a youth and family minister. I have been a minister since 1980. I have served in this community as a police chaplain assigned to a SWAT team since 1992, and I've been in private practice as a licensed professional counselor since 1998. I'm also an adventure educator and an avid outdoorsman. I dabble in rock climbing and I goof around with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Our life has been full of many wonderful experiences and some just outright adventures. I used to write about those things in a little church bulletin article. So now instead of asking you to read those things, we're just going to talk about them in our podcast. And as we talk about them, we're going to talk about the facts. The facts lead to concepts, and the concepts lead to application. One caveat about the facts is, for the most part, we're going to tell you the facts just as they happened. But every now and then, we're going to tell you the way other people have told us they remember it happening with a little bit of embellishment. It's all good, clean fun and for educational purposes. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy Keeping Up with Jones. Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure, is sponsored by SJ&L General Contractors. They are licensed in both Alabama and Tennessee, and they provide services such as mass grading, storm drainage, sewer and concrete improvement, asphalt paving, erosion control, demolition, and heavy hauling. If you need any of these services, contact them 931-433-4660, 931-433-4660. Also, they are in need of heavy equipment operators, concrete finishers, CDL dump truck drivers, and pipe layers. If you're interested in employment with this family-owned business, you can go to the website www.sjnl.com. That's www.sjnl.com. Perpetual animosity. That's the term you can use to describe the relationship between the ancient people of Israel and the ancient people of Amalek, or the Amalekites. In the biblical narrative, you find that Saul is told to take vengeance on the Amalekites because of a historical event with them and the children of Israel. And God tells Saul to utterly destroy the Amalekites. It's in that story that we find that the Amalekites have a king named Agag. Years and years and years later, in the subsequent history of Israel, you find in the book of Esther a conflict that probably has its roots in this perpetual animosity. You have a descendant of Saul, and you have a descendant of Agag, and one of them requires the other to kneel. And because of this perpetual animosity, this hatred between the Israelites and the Amalekites, one's ego will not allow it to happen, and so there's this conflict that occurs. The whole thing could have been avoided if you'd put to bed this perpetual animosity. Now, when I talk about the Amalekites, I talk about bees. Yes, bees. Honeybees, although they sort of get a pass because they make honey. Honeybees, bumblebees, wasp, yellow jackets, hornets, ball-faced hornets, Japanese hornets, anything that can fly and anything that will sting, I'm at perpetual war with. Now, in all honesty, I probably began the hostilities. I know as a little boy we shot rubber band guns at wasp nest. I know as a very young little boy, my grandfather would help us harvest wasp nest, and we would brim fish with the larva that is inside those nests. But what I remember is the aggression of the bees. I remember when we were little, we lived on McPherson Street. Now that's before I started the first grade, is when we lived on McPherson Street. And our Yankee cousins would come to visit us every summer. Now, I don't know how I knew I had Yankee cousins. I was supposed to just have cousins, but in our minds, we knew they were Yankee cousins. And having grown up in Calhoun County, Alabama, I guess it was significant that you had people in your lineage and they were Yankees. Maybe in my little pre-first grade mind, it was akin to them being Philistines or Amalekites themselves. But we were on our swing set, the little push-pull glider thing, and I remember, I think it was Tina Cupo, my little cousin, and she swung her hand at a bee. The bee landed on my belly button and stung me. And in my mind, this is a bumblebee the size of a $50. In actuality, it was probably a honeybee. Nonetheless, I remember that very distinctly, that bee landing on my belly and impaling me with the spear in its abdomen. As a little boy, second or third grade, I was walking through the tall grass in the playground at Bynum Elementary School, and something stung me on my calf through my blue jeans. My leg tightened up. It swelled up. I began to feel sick, got chills, and actually broke out in a little small rash and had to go home from school. My war with bees was deeply entrenched. I don't like them. I hate them. You'll see me as nervous as you'll ever see me if we encounter a hornet's nest or a large group of swarming bees. I'd been rock climbing on Cheehaw Mountain. And as a young man approaching my college age years, I had long since stopped chasing bees and capturing bees in jars. And, we really didn't have any hostilities toward bees. We'd sort of just kind of, I'd grown out of that whole I'm going to kill every bee I ever see phase. Been rock climbing on Cheehaw, and the deal was we'd usually climb around Pulpit Rock, which we always call the Devil's Pulpit, or there was a route over on the other side of the mountain that we called Saturday Night Live. And we had finished climbing, and as was our tradition, we would go to the restaurant at Cheehaw and order a Wild Mountain Blackberry Sundae, and after having eaten all the sugar that we could eat, we would go down the back side of the mountain and basically make this long circle. And we never went up the mountain and down the mountain the same way. We always drove by Lake Chenobee, and then you could hike from Lake Chenobee up this trail called the Silent Trail and find this series of beautiful, very small waterfalls with pools deep enough to swim in. And the person I was climbing with and I had decided that we were going to go up to this beautiful waterfall. And for whatever reason, maybe because I didn't trust my old car, I took my climbing gear with me. And I didn't have a lot of climbing gear in those days. We were just doing top roping. So, don't think of this rack of lead gear, a couple of simple carabiners and a few runners and my rope. And we walked up to Chenobee, and lo and behold, we were not the only people at Chenobee. There was a group of girls there, and they were sunbathing. Now, as a young man who was perpetually at war with bees, I was also perpetually fascinated with females. And I didn't think this was the appropriate time to maybe flirt, but I thought, it might be an opportunity to find out somebody's name and find out where they might live. And then maybe later you'd have an interaction or make a phone call or something. But as we're talking about the fact that we'd been rock climbing, one of the little girls, one of the little blondes, looked out across that little pool, and there was this rock sticking up on the far side. And she batted those blue eyes and said, "Do you think you could climb that rock?" Could I climb that rock? Down into the pool I went, waded around the edge there underneath the waterfall, and start up this rock. And I climbed that rock like Spider-Man. Had Spider-Man been there, he'd have stood and applauded. I got to the top of the rock, and it shelved out, made a little bitty shelf. And I decided to stand on top of the rock and pose triumphantly. And there's a little bitty pine tree right there growing in the soft dirt. And I grabbed that pine tree to lever myself up on this rock. And as I pulled the pine tree, it came out of the ground and the yellow jacket nest came with it. I was face to face with the angry horde. Now, my composure went out the window very quickly. I released the pine tree and jumped from said rock into the pool. And just so that everybody is on the same page, my war cry sounds like a woman screaming. I hit the water, splashing and flailing. 5 of those bees had gotten in my shirt before I could get into the water. Once I got into the water and took my shirt off and beat it mercilessly against the surface of the water and the rocks as I approached them, I had stings on my face. I had stings on my arm. I had stings inside my shirt. Needless to say, the young ladies were not impressed with my rock climbing ability, and my cool points drifted down the river. I had renewed the perpetual animosity with the bees. And now if I find a yellow jacket's nest or I find a hole in the ground that I even suspect bees are coming out of, I'll fill it with some kind of fuel and I'll light it. Now I understand the fuel in and of itself kills the bees. I just think you need to add that little je ne sais quoi and put some flame to them. I remember we found a bee's nest on an overhanging dirt bank, and we lowered a can of gasoline over the edge on a string. And when it got suspended in front of the bees, we tied it off. We walked around and I shot the thing with a .357 Magnum. Now, there was no ensuing fireball. It was just the spray of the gas and the impact of the 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow point that made the bees very angry. When you put gasoline on a bee or on an insect like that, what happens is that they freeze to death. You see, the gasoline hits their exoskeleton and then it evaporates so quickly that they actually die from being frozen or exposed or whatever. At least that's the popular theory that I heard. It may not be true. It may be an urban myth. But I've thrown lots of gas on the bees, and I decided that every time I put gas on a bee, I needed to put some flames with it. What is it that Harry Dresden says? If you build a man a fire, he'll be warm for a day. If you light a man on fire, he's warm the rest of his life. Well, that's the way I feel about a bee. You put him on fire, he'll be warm the rest of his life. We used to work at Berry College on their ropes course. We would drive over and go up to the Bold program headquarters and help them facilitate groups. Typically, we worked when they had church groups, sport teams, and every year we went for an annual event with Georgia Tech and their master's degree students. My companion in all of this, lots of times, was a guy named Derek Horst. Derek has been one of my loyal friends and a true companion since I moved to Huntsville in 1986. He and Chris Luter helped me unload my truck. I've known Derek since he was 16 years old, or maybe even just slightly younger than that. This young man stands well over 6 foot tall, and through the years, he's added some girth to his personages. Well, I'll just have to edit that out. He gotten bigger. In fact, in the north of 300-pound range, bigger. So when we pull up in my little Toyota truck and we get out, it looks like Han Solo and Chewbacca getting out of the truck. Even such that as we would go someplace where people knew Derek and I, especially at Berry College, they would ask, "Hey, where's your Wookiee?" And I don't know if it's the fact that most of the people who worked at Berry College were student workers and they were in the Bold program and basically taking a class, and we would come in from out of town. And anytime anybody comes in from out of town, they're an expert, right? So we'd show up on this campus with these college kids, and we had this long friendship with the director of the program, Mike King. So we were sort of figures of legend. You know, we were probably in our middle 30s at the time. I was in my middle 30s, Derek probably in his late 20s. And so we show up to do this work, and these young college kids see us as these venerated ropes course professionals. They probably thought we helped build the course. And looking back at their age versus our age, they probably thought we planted the trees. But we would get out on the course, and these college kids knew we had this reputation as a consummate professionals in the vertical world. One year, they hired several of us, a group called Higher Ground USA, a nonprofit adventure group run by Nathan Hicks, hired us to come over and run a program at, I think it was Skyline Christian Youth Camp, or Camp Skyline now. And they had us come over and facilitate their ropes course. We always brought our own gear, because when you go to these places that have a ropes course, but they don't have a dedicated ropes course staff, sometimes you'll find that the gear is in disrepair. There's no rope logs. You don't know how old these ropes are. So we often just brought some gear that was reserved only for groups. So they weren't using our personal gear. But so we started exploring this old climbing tower that they wanted us to rig and run a day of climbing and rappelling on. And it's probably a 4-story tower, and it's enclosed so that you can go up by steps into the storage areas. Well, we get up to the top of this thing, looking at their ropes and trying to check out their anchoring things. And in the very top left corner of this tower is a large yellow jacket's nest. Now, yellow jackets typically build underground, but this looked like a combination of a wasp nest, hornet's nest, but it was surrounded by the small black and yellow bees, which I call yellow jackets. Very aggressive. These bees don't eat nectar, they eat meat. You can find them around carcasses. You can find them around rotting meat. They'll show up at your picnic if you're not careful. Now, they eat sugar. You can draw them in with sugar, but they'll eat nearly anything. They're a carrion bee. They eat lots of things that are rotting and decaying. And so here we are now. We've got this group of kids who are going to come and try to climb this tower. And we can't run a program with bees. So here we are trying to figure out what we're going to do with the bees. Now, this particular group had also hired a young man, and I'll save you his name, but he's one of these hard chargers. All-American apple pie kid. I have great respect for the comic book character Captain America. I like the concept of who Captain America is. I'm not necessarily a fan of the guy who plays Captain America. But in this instance, I'm using the term Captain America like Bruce Willis uses it in the movie Armageddon. Somebody who's a little bit too clean cut, somebody who's a little bit too hard charging, and that was this kid. Derek and I called him Captain America. Well, Captain America is with us at this climbing tower, and we're trying to solve the problem of the bees. And that's when I realize that Captain America here is such a hard charger. He might be willing to try to do something of daring do. So Derek and I began to muse. I felt a bit like Tom Sawyer talking about whitewashing a fence. You know, you could get on the top of that tower and go in from the opposite side attached to a rope, attack the bees, swing out the window, wrap back around the tower, and then be lowered to the ground. And the bees probably couldn't get to you. Man, that'd be cool to do. You know what, man? I wish we had somebody here to film that. If you could do that, you'd be legendary. And so we began to talk about which one of us was going to do it. All the while, the bright, eager eyes of Captain America watching us. And he finally goes, "Hey, guys, I'll do it." Well, no, we probably couldn't let you do it. You know, you'd need, maybe some more protective gear than we can. No, I've got a rain suit. So after some work, we have this kid in a yellow rubber rain suit. We have his ankles taped with duct tape. We have his wrist taped with duct tape. We have his hood duct taped on him. And then we get a can of Raid or some kind of insect spray. We get him into a harness and we haul him up this tower. And he scrambles in this window. We lose sight of him. You can barely hear the spray of the aerosol can, and then the "ah!" as he comes flying out this window, slings around the tower, slams into it, and then we lower him to the ground. It was evil, mean, and wrong, but very entertaining. All because I hate bees. And this young man put himself in that position, maybe to earn some cool points, maybe to impress us, maybe so that he could talk about this later on and say, hey, I was at Camp Skyline with Mr. Derek and Mr. Lonnie, and I did something they wouldn't do. Maybe. Or maybe he was just foolish enough to try to do something to quote unquote earn our respect. You know, I've come to discover that I do a lot of things or have done things in my early life. And it's probably because I was at perpetual war. But it may be that I was at perpetual war with myself. And maybe we find that we don't accept ourselves and we don't like ourselves, and so we have to prove ourselves. And maybe it's not about being at war with bees, but being at war with ourselves. Maybe it's being at war with being authentic or just being us. I don't have to earn your respect. If I live by a moral compass, if I'm a person of integrity, if I'm a person of ethics, if I am a person of consistency or congruity, if what I say and how I live match, then you'll choose to respect that or you won't. And that really says more about you than it does about me. But we find ourselves in these precarious positions doing these silly things, sometimes just in an attempt to impress people. And when I quit trying to impress people, when I realized that being a person of influence was much more powerful than being a person who impresses. And by the way, if you want to ask, are you a leader? Are you a person of influence? Then ask and answer these questions. If someone looked at you and said, do you like me? Can I trust you? And will you help me? If you can answer those three questions honestly, that you honestly see value in people and that you like them, maybe not on an emotional level, but just give them value. You honestly look at everybody and say, I can see value in you, so therefore I like you. And you absolutely can trust me. And then I will help you if it's within my power. That's when you don't have to worry about impressing people, but just influencing people. And probably when we decide that our job on the planet is to serve and thus influence, we quit trying to impress others, and we'll stop having perpetual animosity with ourselves. There are 32 miles of cave passages in Cumberland Cavern. 333 feet underground is the Volcano Room. The Volcano Room is the site for the youth rally known as Erupt. It's an underground youth rally. It's an annual event. It takes place in October. The next Erupt is scheduled for October of 2021. Erupt is a sponsor of Keeping Up with Jones, the Lonnie Jones podcast adventure. If you'd like more information, you may contact them at eruptyouithrally@gmail.com. That's eruptyouithrally@gmail.com. Or check out their website for more information, 3 W's and a dot, eruptyouthrally.com, www.eruptyouthrally.com.